So, welcome to this course. This course is designed to help you to speak English with a clear British accent. You are probably tired of people not fully understanding what you are saying, and now with so many people from around the world, hundreds of millions of people learning English, it's more important than ever for us to be able to communicate clearly and for people to be able to understand what we say. It's vital even for our career to be able to speak English in an accent that other people can understand. In this course, we will be going through each of the consonant sounds that are made in English. You may be surprised by some of these. Even some native English speakers are surprised. We'll then be going through some vowel sounds. We'll be discussing the secret vowel, the one that even many English speakers don't know that they make, even though it's the most common in all the British English language speaking. We'll then go on to discuss common mistakes which people make depending on where they are from in the world, or perhaps what language they've spoken before, and we'll discuss how we can avoid making those mistakes so that your English can be clear to understand. I really hope that you enjoy this course, and I hope that it will benefit you greatly to be able to speak more clearly than before and to be understood better than ever before. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get started. So before we get started, a very good question is, what actually is a British accent? Well, there are a huge variety of different accents within Britain. Whether you come from Scotland or Wales or from the southwest or from London or from Yorkshire, even certain towns in different parts of Britain have their own unique accent. And once you get used to them, you can hear where somebody is from. Now, with what we call a British accent in this course, this is a neutral English accent, one where people won't be able to tell where you have learnt it. Different accents have very particular styles. To use one word as an example, the word congratulations. If I was from Wales, I would probably pronounce that congratulations. Whereas if I was from Yorkshire, I might say it more like congratulations. You can hear how the vowel sounds particularly are quite different. But we will be learning neutral British accent. This is one that will be understood and recognised and respected anywhere you go. So this will be the most useful accent for you to learn, whether you are looking to learn this for life in Britain or for whatever other purpose. This will be a useful British accent that will be understood, hopefully, by everybody. So let's take a closer look at some of the challenges we have with the English language in our next lesson. Now, sadly, the English language is very difficult when it comes to the difference between what is written down and what you say. There are a huge number of exceptions, and in this course we won't be able to cover all the exceptions. That would probably be a 50-hour course. So what we will aim to do in this course is to talk about the sounds that are normally used when a certain combination of letters is used. So in the English language we have a certain number of sounds, 44 sounds, or 43 according to some people. Now these sounds will apply across whatever letters are written down. So then the trick that you will have to try to do afterwards is to associate the sound that you have learnt with the letters that are written down. So we will cover the most common examples, and then we will discuss a few exceptions, and then as you continue your English learning, if English isn't your first language, you will come across more examples, but the most important thing is to be able to identify it to one of the sounds that we will discuss in this course. Once you have learnt all these sounds well, the rest will be a lot easier. And even when you make a mistake, somebody will help you to correct your mistake, and then you will find out which sound applies, and then it will be easy. So hopefully in moving forward, this course will be very helpful for you to be able to communicate more easily and clearly in spoken English, and also to be able to better identify what is written and how you should say that. So let's start with looking at English consonant sounds. So, as you may know, in most languages we have consonant sounds and vowel sounds. Consonant is a hard sound, and a vowel sound is a soft sound. These are broken down into further categories, and we'll start with the consonant sounds. In English there are 24 consonant sounds. Now, some of these apply very easily to a letter, a consonant letter. And so when you see that letter, you'll know you always make that sound. Some are a little bit less clear, and we will try to look at all the different examples, or as many as we can throughout this course. Now, consonant sounds can be divided principally into two groups: voiced and non-voiced. What we're going to do as we go through these sounds is divide them into groups of two, and these groups will be where we use the same mouth shape, but we have one that is voiced and one that is non-voiced. Now, what do we mean by voiced and non-voiced? Voiced is where your vocal cords are engaged, and that means that you create this vibration of sound, like that. If it's non-voiced, it means the sound is only being made from your mouth without the air coming through your vocal cords. Sh, ch, p, ch. Sounds like that. As you can see, there's no vibration coming through my vocal cords, so these are non-voiced sounds. So for each set of sounds that we look at, we'll have one that is voiced, one that is non-voiced, and hopefully that will make it easier for us to learn them in these pairs. So let's get started with our first consonant sounds. So our first consonant sounds are the letters V and F. These normally correspond to the letters V and F. But there are one or two exceptions, as we'll look at in a moment. So we'll start in each of these cases with the voiced sound. The voiced sound is V. Now when you say V, you place your teeth on your bottom lip, and then you engage your vocal cords and you push the sound out. V. Some examples of this might be van, vat, very. The other sound, the non-voiced sound, is f. Now, how do we know that this is non-voiced? It's because when we're creating the sound, the only sound is air coming through our mouth. There is no air coming through our vocal cords. And that's how we know that it is non-voiced. So what are some examples of words that we might use that include the sound f? Fan, fill, fun. Now, and one important thing to know with this sound is that there is a unique combination of letters that makes this sound, and that is PH. When you have PH together, that will normally make the sound F. For example, phantom, photo, elephant. You can see the sound is exactly the same. It's just a F sound. but it's when you have these letters P and H together. Sadly, as with all things in English, this isn't always consistent, and when you see the letter F, sometimes this will be pronounced as a V sound, as a voiced sound. One important example that you should know about is the word of, which is O-F, but in this case the F is pronounced like a V. If we have O-F-F, off, that then is non-voiced, but the F in of is voiced. It's impossible to cover all of these exceptions, but we will try to discuss the most important ones as we go through these letters. Now we will have a chance to practice all these sounds later on. Some of them we might hear more at the end of the word or at the beginning of the word. But first of all, we're just going to discuss all these sounds, get the initial sound, and then we'll do more practice on all these letters after we've discussed most of them. And then hopefully we'll be able to put them together, come up with different combinations, and make sure that we're ready for whatever word we have to try to pronounce. So let's go on to the next one. Now our next set of letters, there are actually 3 now, and that's because one of them belongs to a different category, which is called nasal. We'll come to that in a moment. So let's start with the voiced letter. The voiced letter here is B, normally represented by the letter B. The non-voiced is P, normally represented by the letter P. We'll come to the nasal one in just one moment. So how do we create these two sounds? B and P. Very easy. Lips together. Build up pressure behind. With the B sound, we build up pressure with the vocal cords. B. With the P sound, we build up pressure without using the vocal cords. P. That sound is completely silent until it releases. So, some words for the letter or for the sound B: bat, bin, buck. For the P sound: pat, pin, puck. Now moving on to the M sound. This is very similar. Your mouth will be in the same shape. The only difference is you will open your nasal cavity, which is inside your head. And this is something that you will automatically close off when you're making the B or P sounds. But we want to open it up now for the M sound. You'll feel the vibration going on in your head. M. It's a lot louder, and it's very clear to feel this because you can feel the vibration. What are some words that we could use? Mat, muck, map. It almost sounds like a cow. But this is the first of our nasal sounds. So the 3 letters we have: B, M, P. The mouth shape is the same with each of them. One of them we engage the vocal cords, one of them we engage the vocal cords and the nasal cavity, and one of them we just use our mouth. So hopefully this nicely explains the difference between these 3 very common letters. So let's go on to our next sounds, the sounds D and T. Again, these have exactly the same mouth shape, but one of them we engage our vocal cords, and that's the sound D. This is normally the letter D, D. Just like with the letter B, you can feel the pressure building up with your vocal cords behind your teeth this time, instead of your closed lips. D, D. Your tongue will normally be touching the roof of your mouth, D. And then that helps you hold back the pressure before you release it. Some examples of words might be dish, duck, down. What about the sound T? As you'll notice, no vocal cords here. T. Now this sound is a very important one to practice because this is one that is typically recognised as being very British. And why? Because in Britain we have afternoon tea. The Queen has high tea. And this sound, T, is quite different to the way it is pronounced in other parts of the world. In Europe, this sound will often be pronounced like ta, ta, with the tongue up behind the front teeth and the teeth apart, ta. But in British English, teeth together. And then we have this very sharp T sound. This is worth practicing. This will identify you as somebody who speaks a good British accent. So, some practice words. Tuck, tip, tab. One important thing to mention here is that, sadly, as with some of our other sounds, the letter D is sometimes pronounced with a T sound. This will normally be at the end of a word when you have ED. Sometimes it's pronounced like a normal D sound, but sometimes it's pronounced like a T sound. What are some examples? If we're talking about something passing you, we will say, this car passed me. P-A-S-S-E-D, passed. Some other examples are itched, scratched. You will notice in these examples that we don't pronounce the E sound at all. The T is almost like an extra consonant that links directly to the consonant before it. Passed. It's almost like S-T. Now some of these it may take time to know which ones are pronounced like a T, whereas some are pronounced more like a D. Sacred, fed. These are ones where you hear the E sound before the last letter. So hopefully you will get used to these as you go through. This is to give you a pattern which you will be able to notice two different variations of, and then you'll know whether to make the sound D or T. We'll come back to some more practice ones later on. And importantly, this is one that can commonly be mistaken. So we'll discuss these sounds a little bit more later on in our common mistakes category. But for now, let's move on to the next sounds. Now the next sounds that we're going to look at are the sounds G and K. So for the sound G, we close our mouth at the back. So where the back of our tongue is and the roof of our mouth, we put them together like that. And then we say G. Again, we engage our vocal cords to make that sound. With the sound K, the shape is exactly the same, but we don't engage our vocal cords. K. Now the sound K can actually be represented with a number of different letters. We have the letter C, K. We have the letter K, K. We have the letter Q, Qu. And we have the letter X. Now, as you can hear with each of those, there is a K sound in there. With the last two, it includes also another sound next to it. But still, that's only the sound K. Perhaps with the S, X, X. But it's not really a separate, unique sound. So what are some examples of these? So for the sound g, we may have goat, gap, gun. For the sound k, coat, cup, call. As we're pronouncing the k sound, we're not engaging our vocal cords at all. But when we pronounce the g sound, we are. We'll practice these later on, but for the meantime, let's go on to the next sounds. Our next sounds are the sounds j and ch. Now the sound j is normally represented by the letter J, but it can also be represented by the letter G, which we looked at in our last lesson as normally having the sound g, but it can also be pronounced j. So let's discuss the letter J. Now to make this sound j, you close your mouth in with your tongue very close with the roof of your mouth and your teeth quite close together, and then you release. J. J. You can feel the vocal cords engaging because this is the voiced sound. J. The ch sound, exactly the same shape, but this time we don't have our vocal cords engaged. We're just making the sound ch. So, what are some examples that we could use? Jam, jump, jelly. With the ch sound, the non-voiced sound, we might say chance, chill, cherry. Just a note that occasionally when you see the ch sound, it may be pronounced like a k, as in the previous lesson. But hopefully this will become clear. For example, the word ache has a ch in it, but it is pronounced like a k. But hopefully you will be able to see that these sounds j and ch are very closely related, one of them voiced and one of them non-voiced. So let's go on to the next sound. Now, our next pair of sounds is a little bit unusual in that they are both voiced sounds. The letters are L and N. The difference between these two is that the second sound, N, is a nasal sound. As we discussed earlier, this means we engage the nasal cavity. But let's start with the letter L. We put our tongue up behind our top teeth, L, and then we flap it down, L. Some examples of this might be lad, lip, lumber. For the sound N, again we open up this nasal cavity, which means that we can make a sound even if there's not much coming out of our mouth. N, n, n. Some examples of this N sound might be not, no, nap. This vibration inside our head means that this again can be quite a noisy sound. Noisy. But actually, when we normally use it, it's quite quick. No, I'm not interested. This is how this differs from the letter L. L, N. Let's go on to our next set of sounds. Now, as we discussed earlier, some sounds are particularly British and they're important to practice. This next one comes into that category. The sounds are Z and S. The sound Z is voiced. It's like the sound a B makes. Z. The sound S is not voiced. That's, again, the vocal cords are not engaged for this sound. This is like the sound a snake makes. Now, the sound S is important to practice because, again, this can sound very different in different languages. In some European countries, we might hear sh, 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 sh. With the tongue further back, sh, teeth are not too close together. In some countries, in some languages, they don't have this sound at all. But in English, it's a very clear and distinct sound. S. How do you make the sound? Teeth close together, air being pushed through, S, and the tongue quite close behind the teeth. S. So what are some examples of these words? For the Z sound, we may have zip, zoo, zap. For the S sound, sap, sip, sum. One important thing to know about this sound S, as you can hear, we use it a lot in English. But one important thing to know is that it's also included with the letter X. As we discussed earlier, we have the K and the S sound. Box is an example. We also may use the letter C to pronounce the S sound. Perhaps the word race or mice. Normally this will happen when we have the letter E after C. When we have C, E together, that will mostly sound like a S. And when we have C and I together, again, that will normally sound like a S, as in the example of icicle. These sounds are important to practice, and you will find that as you get used to pronouncing the S sound and the Z sound, like a British person does, then your accent will take shape and it will start sounding really good. So keep up the practice. We'll come back to more exercises to work on these later on. Now, our next sounds are all a little bit different. These aren't quite as related as perhaps the rest are. Our first sound is H. The letter is normally what we call H, and the sound is a breathy sound. H. Some examples of H might be hot, hotel, hip. This is one which is very easily missed out by some languages who perhaps don't use this sound. Therefore, in Britain, we get used to people asking for hotel, for example, as opposed to hotel. So again, this is a good one to practice. Some others may even make this sound harder than it is and have a H sound. But there's no vibration here. It's not H or R. It's just a simple breathy H sound. Very soft. Now, our next sound is W. Now, this one is unusual in that our lips don't fully touch for this sound and our teeth aren't really involved. W. We make our lips into a very close circle. We make the sound W, and then we release. It's almost like a vowel sound, this one, but it's normally used in English as a consonant. W. Some examples of this would be wet, wind, wall. You'll notice there's a distinct vibration when we make the W sound. And the last of our three for this lesson is the Y sound. Now, this is an unusual one in that sometimes in English this is treated as a vowel rather than a consonant. But technically it is a consonant. Y is pronounced, you'll notice, by bringing up your tongue towards the roof of your mouth, yeah, and then releasing. Some examples that we might use this sound for are yacht, yellow, yum. Some words in English don't actually have any vowels, but they have the Y or the Y sound in there, which is represented by the letter Y. The word rhythm has 6 letters, but no vowels, because this Y is a half vowel, half consonant, which is good to remember. If you see it in a word, it will normally have the Y or I sound with it, or sometimes I. So hopefully that helps with these 3 sounds, H, W, and Y. Let's go on to the next. Now the next 2 sounds are closely related, as the rest have been, one voiced and one non-voiced. But some English people will be confident that they don't use this first sound, but they do. The sound is J. Now, perhaps the easiest way for some people to think of this would be the letter J in saying the French name Jacques. It's a J. Sometimes this is represented with the letters Z, H, J. In English, we never have this at the beginning of a word, but we do sometimes have it at the end of a word or the middle of a word. Examples for this one are measure, leisure, beige. Again, if you speak to an English person and point out to him that he makes these sounds, he'll probably be surprised, because it's not something we are aware of, and as you'll have noticed from these examples, the spelling can change. The second sound is sh. Now, with the j, we engage our vocal cords. With sh, we don't. It's quite similar to ch, which we did earlier, but with sh, you'll notice it's very slightly softer, mouth a tiny bit more loose. Sh. Some examples for sh might be shirt, sham, ship. This sound is most of the time produced by the letters S and H put together. Sh. That is how we would normally represent it. But sometimes, as always in English, we have exceptions. One important exception to know about is when you have the letters T, I after another vowel. I'll give you a few examples of this. Nation, lotion, potion. You will notice that the TI here is pronounced exactly the same as the sh sound. But of course, if you don't know this, you may say notion or nation. You probably know these words, which will help you to recognize that this sound can be produced by the TI sounds as well. So we've learnt about j and sh. Let's go on to our next set of letters. Now, our 2 sounds for this lesson are very closely linked. In fact, they are always spelt the same, just to make life hard for people learning English. These are the sounds that are produced, they're normally represented by the letters TH. The voiced version is the. Now, this is a particularly hard sound for non-English speakers to make, and we'll come back to this later on to have a bit more practice. The sound is made by putting your tongue either between your teeth or very close behind with a slight gap. The. And then we let our vocal cords engage, we push the air through, the. And that's the sound. The non-voiced sound here is where we don't engage the vocal cords, we just push air through from our mouth. The. So notice the same mouth shape. The. 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 You notice the difference. Now the hard thing with this is that these are always spelt in English with a TH. Sometimes the is shown in other languages as DH, simply because the D is softer than T and the is softer than th. But in practice, unfortunately, in English, you always see it with the TH. So what are some examples? Well, for the voiced sound, the, we have the word the most common word in the English language, THE. We have this, thus. For the non-voiced sound, we might have thing, thick, thump. It will only take practice to learn the difference between when these two sounds are used, but hopefully over time you'll start to see a pattern. Again, if you practice these sounds carefully, this will be a big help towards you sounding like you have a pure and clear British accent. So our next sound, again just one sound for this lesson, is the letter R, normally represented by the letter R. Now we will come back to this letter later on because this is the single biggest mistake which many people will make when they're speaking English, and I'll explain more later on. The sound is produced by placing your top teeth on your bottom lip. Inside your bottom lip, not here, but inside. R. Example words might be red, ruddy, rabbit. One of the reasons that this is so hard is because the letter R is pronounced very differently in other parts of the world. For example, in French, it's pronounced R. In German, it is normally pronounced R. And in Spanish or Italian or other Latin languages, it is pronounced R. So for many to learn the English version of this is quite hard. So keep practicing this sound, R. And later on we'll come to different examples of how it sounds when it is in the middle of a word as well. So our last unique consonant sound is the sound which is normally pronounced by the letters N and G coming together. And the sound is the last of our nasal sounds. This sound is This is slightly harder to make. This would normally be found at the end of a word which is indicating an ongoing action. Here are some examples. Going, eating, driving. You'll notice it's not driving, and even some English people will pronounce this wrong, depending on which part of the country they're from. It's driving. You will feel the vibration in your nasal cavity, again, in the middle of your head, and that sound will be clear to make. This can also be the case with some words that have K at the end after the letter N. As we know, N is a nasal sound, N. So we go from N to Ng. Now, in practical terms, it's because our tongue is touching the roof of our mouth at the back rather than at the front. With N, it's touching our mouth at the front, the roof of our mouth, na. With nga, it's our tongue is touching the roof of our mouth further back. What about the word ink or pink? Again, nga. It's very brief, it's very short, but there's that unique sound in there. So that is the last of our unique consonant sounds. Now we've only discussed some very brief examples of this. The next thing that we're going to look at is combined consonants in the next lesson. So what often happens in English is we put two consonant sounds together with no vowel in between them, and we're expected to pronounce them together. So what are some examples of what we might be asked to pronounce? So with the sound r, we might have b and r, bruh, cr, dr, fr, gr, pr, tr, or even str. 3 letters together in that case. You will come across these, and in each of these we just have to remember to keep them together and not try to put a vowel sound in between them. For example, if we're trying to say the word brother, we don't want to say brother. Or if we're trying to use the word trap, we don't say trap. It's trap, trap, trap. Or the same if we have the word strap. It can sometimes be hard to put these all together, but a little bit of practice will help. With the sound l, this also is one that will commonly come after another consonant sound. We may have bl, cl, fl, gl, pl. The same applies as we mentioned before. If we're using the word clap, we certainly don't want to say clap. It's clap. This will take a bit of practice, but once you manage to work your tongue to pronounce these words and these sounds as they should, it will sound excellent. And the last common consonant that is used is one that comes before, and that's the s sound. So we may have sk, sp, sm, sn, st, sl, or sw. Most of these you will find are quite simple to pronounce: spin, stand, and they're very common in English. It's just to make you aware that often we will have these consonant sounds put together. I hope that's been helpful. Next we'll be looking at silent consonants. So again, just because English is more difficult than it needs to be, sometimes we have a letter, a consonant, which is included, which we don't pronounce. We don't say it at all. It's just there to look good. You will notice that most of these have a pattern, and so once you know which letters might be silent, you will know not to pronounce these. So, if you have the letters G and N together, you normally will not pronounce the G. And one example might be gnat or a line. If you have the letters K, N together in that order, again you probably won't pronounce the K. A common example will be knife. It just starts with the sound N, knife. Another one that you might come across is when you have L, M together. An example might be palm. In this case, the L you will notice is not pronounced at all. Palm. Or calm. Another time when the letter L is not pronounced is when we have the letters U, L, D. For example, the word would, could, should. In these cases, again, the L is completely silent. The letters B and P can sometimes be shown as well, but not pronounced. The B can sometimes come after the letter M. An example might be lamb or comb. Here we don't pronounce the B, we don't say lamb, it's just lamb or comb. The B is totally silent. Or how about the example of the letter P when it comes before the letter S? Psychology, psalm. Here we don't pronounce the P at all. We just pronounce the S sound. Psychology, psychiatry. The P is completely silent. Sometimes the letter W will appear before the letter R. Right, wreck. This shows that the letter W is completely silent. It's just the R sound that we produce in these cases. Another common example is when you have WH together. Some very common words have this combination of letters. For example, what, which, where. In these cases, the H sound doesn't exist. Now, in some parts of England, they will say what, which, and where. But that's not common. The common way is just to pronounce the W sound. However, with the word who, this is pronounced as if the W didn't exist. It's pronounced like it was just starting with the sound H. So watch out. English will catch you out at different points if you're not careful. Now, the most famous and the most difficult of these letter combinations is the combination GH. This is famous because it can be pronounced in whatever way you like, almost, it would seem. Let's take a few words and we'll show you how this can be pronounced in very different ways. Ghost. The letter H, as you'll notice, doesn't sound at all. Tough. In this example, the GH sounds like the F sound. It's the same with cough. In the next example, the sound disappears completely. Bow. Through. Thorough. I'm afraid that these you simply have to learn one by one. The GH sound is famous for having lots of different ways to pronounce it. So sadly, with this particular example, you will probably have to learn these examples on an individual basis. So, in this section, we're going to be looking at all the vowel sounds that we make in British English. Now, there are classed as 19 different vowel sounds that we make. Some will say 20. However, there is one sound which is produced more in American English than in British English. In any case, I will teach you all the sounds that we make. Now, these are broken down into short vowel sounds, of which there are 7. Then there are longer vowel sounds, of which there are 5. And then what we call diphthongs, which is combined vowel sounds, where it starts as one vowel sound and ends in another. Now, don't worry if that sounds complicated. I'll guide you through these so that by the end of this section, you will feel confident in using all the vowel sounds that we make in British English. So let's make a start. So the first of our short vowel sounds is the letter A, which makes the sound A. This is the sound that we would make in words such as cat, bat, rap. This sound here can commonly be confused with the sound. So when you're making the sound, make sure you feel that your mouth is spread nice and wide, and then You'll notice the sound coming from the back of your mouth area, there, and it might sound a little bit closed, but don't worry, because that is the correct way that it should sound. Bat, cat, rap. So practice this one, and later on we'll see what is the longer vowel sound that is the equivalent of The second one is the next vowel in the alphabet, which is the letter E. Now the sound we make for the letter E when it's in a word is eh. Now we would use in a word such as bet, peck, ref. Again, this letter sometimes, or this sound, is sometimes misunderstood. So by all means, have a practice at this. We'll have a chance to do that later on in the course as well. So this is the short sound eh. The third short vowel sound is I, which corresponds to the letter I. We would use this in words such as bit, pick, rip, tryst, and in a number of different other ones. Sometimes this is represented by the letter Y, as you will have just seen, and as we discussed earlier in the consonant section of the course, but generally it's the letter I, and it's pronounced I. The next one is the sound O. Now this sound is a little bit different to how you will hear this in the sound in some other languages. Normally the letter O, and that letter is quite handy because it shows the shape that your mouth should make. So your lips should be in an O shape, O, and then the sound comes out like that. So we might say pot, cop, rock, and many such words such as this, which demonstrate the short vowel sound O. And the fifth of our short vowel sounds corresponds to the letter U, and this sound is We might use this in cup, luck, mull. Now this is an interesting one because sometimes people from different parts of Britain will pronounce this a little bit differently. But don't be too put off by this. We're learning neutral English here, and so this sound is cup. If you keep practicing it this way, then you'll be understood wherever you go. Now the sixth of our short vowel sounds doesn't correspond directly to one of the letters in the normal alphabet, which is why we're going to introduce our symbol. Now, although we said at the start we won't be doing lots of these symbols, there are just two that we're going to use because these are very useful for these short vowel sounds. This is the first of these. This generally corresponds to the letter U, and as you'll see it looks like an adjusted version of a letter U. But this time it's pronounced U. It's the sort of sound that you might make if somebody punched you in the stomach. This, when I mentioned in the previous lesson, is sometimes used in different parts of Britain as the sound instead of the sound. So whereas I say cup, somebody in the north of England might say cup. However, don't be fooled. The correct pronunciation of the sound we previously discussed is Now this sound does have a correct usage. This would be in words such as put, took, cook. You'll notice that in these last two examples it's represented by a double O. Now we'll come to this double O a bit later on because that also corresponds to another sound. But this is the short sound. It doesn't change, it doesn't last too long, it's just And so we'll remember this one as being represented by this particular symbol. Now the last of our short vowel sounds is what I call the secret vowel sound, because English people produce this all the time without being aware that it even exists. This sound, which you'll see represented by this particular symbol, is used probably more commonly than any other vowel sound in the English language, and that's why it's so important for you to learn this sound. Now this sound is pronounced It's a very simple sound to make. It's not complicated, you don't have to move your mouth in any funny shapes at all. You just leave your mouth in a very neutral, normal, relaxed position. That's it. Now, if you showed people this symbol, which is how it is represented, or if you explained to them this sound, they would say, no, I don't make that sound. But they're wrong. This sound is used all the time. We'll discuss a little bit later on about how we can identify this as being one of the main ways that we can improve the British accent. But just to pick up a few examples. Driver. Manager. Brenda. There are many, many examples of this word being used, and as you start to listen to British English, you will hear this all the time. So we'll try to go through later a few examples of when we would use this more commonly, but in the meantime, try to remember this symbol. As I say, there are only just 2 symbols in this course that we're going to use to try to keep things simple. But this is an important one, the most common vowel sound in the British English language sound, So now that we've discussed the short vowel sounds, we'll now discuss the 5 long vowel sounds. Now 2 of these are easiest to recognise as doubled letters. The first of these is the double O that we discussed earlier. Now in most cases when you see a double O come up in a word, it will be pronounced ooh. This might also be the sound that you make when you're surprised or shocked. Ooh. So what sort of words might we use this in? Pool. Shoot. Rude. You'll notice that in this last example, it isn't actually spelt with a double O, but the sound is the same, rude. This is a much longer sound, of course, than the ones we've just been looking at. It lasts longer. The tone changes throughout. Cool. So this is an important sound to recognise, and it's one that we produce in a similar mouth shape to the single O. Ooh. We make a circle with our mouth like the letter O. Ooh. The fact that it's 2 means it's longer. So that is the first of our longer vowel sounds. The second of our longer vowel sounds we could represent by a double E. This sound is E. It's like the name of the letter, E. This might be used in words such as beat, peak, leap. Again, you will notice that it doesn't always come as a double E, but the sound is exactly the same. Often this will come as an EA sound, for example with leap or beast. This sound we make again by flattening out the mouth, big smile, E. The letter I that we discussed earlier was pronounced I. This is almost like a stretched out version of that, E. So that's the second of our longer vowel sounds. Now the third of our longer vowel sounds, and in fact the fourth and the fifth, are all ones that could be described as R-affected sounds. Now what do we mean by that? You won't see this expression in any common publications. If you look at this on the internet, you will simply find these strange symbols which you don't recognize, and you're expected to know how to pronounce these. But in practice, these sounds are most commonly made when they are put with a vowel before the letter R, which is why we discussed earlier that the letter R is so important to learn about. Now the first of these is the sound when you have A and R together, and that is simply R. It's like the name of the letter, R. This one you open up your mouth even at the back and let the air come out, R. Maybe your doctor will ask you to say R like that. So what sort of words would this include? Bark, laugh, past. So this will come with different spellings as we've discussed before, but the sound remains the same. It's R. So when you hear somebody saying a word such as last or cast, you will recognize this sound as the AR sound, and therefore you will know how to pronounce it, R. The second of these R-affected letters is the OR sound. This is pronounced OR. Now, you may recognize the shape of the mouth as being similar to the O and OO sounds. But this time you're saying, rather than OO, you're saying OR. Notice how the shape of the mouth and the cheeks narrow even further. Instead of OO, it's OR. It's pulling your mouth up like this to create the shape needed. This sound represents the word or, which we use all the time. And of course it can be used in different words as well, such as pork, taught, lord. This sound is one that's very easy to get wrong. It's one that many people, they won't open their mouth, or they won't make their mouth narrow enough. And so the sound will come out and it won't sound very British. It will be clear that the person speaks another language, and maybe it won't be clear what they're trying to say. But this is how it is pronounced. Now, I will use this example to show how difficult the English language can be. There is one word, pause, which can be spelt in 4 different ways, but it has, and with 4 different meanings, but it has the same sound across all 4. So, pause is when you stop, you take a gap, perhaps when you're speaking. Pause. Pause are the hands of animals such as cats and dogs. They have 2 paws, or 4 paws, including their legs. Pause is what you would say if somebody pours a drink. And also, pores are the parts of your skin where the sweat comes out. So we have pause, 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 and pause. And unfortunately, for those learning English, these are all pronounced in the same way. But at least now you know, and you know that these are all made with the long vowel sound or. The third of our R-affected letters, and the fifth of our long vowel sounds, is the sound Now this can actually be made by any of the 3 remaining vowels. We've had AR, we've had OR, and this one can be ER, IR, or UR. Let's take some examples. Bird, curd, alert. As you'll notice, although these are all spelt differently, the sound is exactly the same. And whenever you see E, I, or U with R following, then that will most of the time make this sound This is also typically the sound that people make if they hesitate. So that is the last of our long vowel sounds. So the remaining 7 vowel sounds that we're going to discuss are talked about as being called diphthongs. All that means is that they start as one vowel and they finish as another. The names of most of the letters are examples of these. For example, I, O. We'll discuss these more in detail as we go along. The first 4 that we're going to discuss are easier to recognize as vowels that are affected by the letter E. So in English, you will often have a word, and then when you have an E at the end of that word, it changes the shape of the vowel. Let's take our first example. Hat is a short vowel sound. It's the vowel sound A, which was the first one we discussed. But if you add the letter E onto the end of that word, it becomes hate. Now, hate is part of this first of these 7 combined vowel sounds, which is A. This starts as E and it ends in E, A. You'll notice that having the E at the end of this word, hat, turns it into hate and changes the whole shape. It doesn't become hatte or hatty. It changes the whole shape of the vowel sound. And this happens with each of the other 4 vowels, A, I, O, and U. So we'll look at these one by one and you'll see how these all create their own vowel sound. So this is the first, A. The second sound, which is affected by having E at the end, is when we have the letter I in before. Let's take an example. Bit is a short vowel sound, I. When we put an E at the end of this word, that then changes to bite. So the sound is I. This is also the name of the letter I, just as the previous one was the name of the letter A. This sound, as you will notice, changes. It starts as A and ends in E, I. The whole shape of the mouth changes through this, and so essentially you have what feels not like a straight vowel sound, but as a curved vowel sound. This is something that is crucial for learning to speak English in an authentic British accent. Let's take some more examples of this particular sound. Bike, mine, light. In this last example, there isn't an E at the end, but the sound is still the same, and we can recognize it as the sound when we have an I with an E at the end. That is how we recognize the sound. It's an E-affected I, and that gives us the sound bite. The next one is when the letter O is affected by having E at the end. This gives us the sound O. Again, like the name of the letter O. Let's take another example. The word dot has a short vowel sound, O, dot. When we add an E at the end, this changes to dote. So again, it starts with and ends in oo, o, o. This sound will often be created when we have an E at the end of a word which has an O just before the previous consonant sound. So what are some more examples of this? Poke, mode, load. In this last example, again, we can see it doesn't fit the pattern, but it's still that same sound that we've got used to. It's the E-affected O, which gives us the sound O. Now the last of these, the letter U, has a slightly different effect. In this case, this wouldn't be classed as a separate vowel sound, but it's an important one for you to know about. Let's take an example of a three-letter word with the letter U in the middle. Cut. This is a short vowel sound, cut. When we add an E on the end of this, we end up with the oo sound, which we already discussed earlier as being the double O, but with a difference. Because here we don't say coot, we say cute. What often happens here is we get the sound of the y before the vowel and after the very first consonant, hence cute. This is the same with lots of different sounds when we have an E at the end of a word that has the U as the previous vowel. What are some more examples? Tune, pure, dune. This may be different, in fact some of these are different in American English, for example, where they will say tune. But in British English we say tune. Some will even, if they're getting lazy, pronounce this as the ch sound, tune, but correct is tune. So hopefully this helps to explain the sound we get when we add an E on the end of the word which has a U as the previous vowel. Now this next vowel sound doesn't sound like a combined vowel sound, but it's always made with two different vowels put together. And this sound is air. Now the easiest way for this to be seen as a word is as the word air, which is all around us. With this particular sound, it starts like the letter e, or the sound e, the short vowel sound which we learnt, such as in bet. But here we stretch it out and make it longer, so we get the sound air. Now, certain words that we might use to contain this sound would be bear, tear, fair. You'll notice in each of these there are two different vowels, and yet the sound is the same across all of these. The sound air. Now the next one is one that definitely changes. This is one where you start with your mouth saying O and you end with your mouth saying E, and that sound is oi. This sound is used a lot in English in words such as boy, toy, point. Typically this would be seen as OI, but of course you can have OY as well. This sound is one of the most with the most contrast between the starting shape and the finishing shape. O to E, oi. Again, this is a very common one in English, and so it's a good one to learn. The next one also has quite a difference between the starting shape and the finishing shape. We start with A, we end with oo, ow. If we write this as a standalone word, it would look like OW, ow. But in words, often it comes with slightly different spelling, with different letters. So what are some examples of words that contain the sound ow? Cow, lout, pound. In each of these, notice how we start saying a, the short vowel sound a, and we end with the vowel sound oo. Pound, pound. Although it's maybe a little bit quicker, we still see that full change of shape in the mouth from a to oo to say ow. Now the last of our vowel sounds is the sound ear. This is used typically, for example, with our ear, but it's used in many other words as well, such as beer, hear, tear. With this vowel sound, we start with the shape I, and we end with our very common sound ear, ear. This change of shape creates a different sound to the short vowel sounds that we previously made, but it's a very useful one because it's used regularly in the English language. So hopefully this has been a helpful overview of all the different vowel sounds that we make in English. Now we will have a chance to practice all of these in our exercises later on. But first we need to take a look at some common mistakes that people make when they learn and speak English. So, depending on where you come from, you might struggle with a different part of British English to somebody else. In this section, we're going to take a look at some of the most common mistakes that people will make, and we're going to talk even about which countries or which languages would be most likely to make this mistake when they're speaking English. So some of these may not apply to you. Some of these you may find very easy to tell the difference. But it's probably still worth a watch, because I'm sure you will at the very least be able to help some of your friends or colleagues to be able to learn from these mistakes. So let's take a look at the first one. Now the first one is one that will mostly affect people from Spain or from South America, Mexico, any Spanish-speaking countries. And this is the difference between the letters B and V, or the sounds B and V. Now, in the Spanish language, these are pronounced approximately the same. And these are pronounced as a physical cross between saying a b and a v by simply having the lips close but not quite touching. V. Voy, for example, as a Spanish word. Now, the challenge now is to separate these into two completely different sounds in English. So let's just go over the difference between these. The sound b is created with your lips fully together, not half together, not v, but b. And that sound is a clear b, popping sound. The letter, or the sound v, is created with your top teeth on your bottom lip. V. And you can feel the vibration going on here. So, to take a few English words as an example. Ban is different to van. Very is different to berry. A verb has both sounds, and each of those has to be distinct. So keep practicing these sounds, and when you see V, make sure you create that vibration with your teeth on your bottom lip. And when you hear B, make sure you get your lips sealed together and then release the air B. And hopefully that will help. Now, another common mistake, and this is typically by speakers of English from perhaps Asia, typically East Asia, would be the difference between the sounds L and R. Now, as we previously discussed, the sound R is fairly unique to English, and so it's understandable that this might bring some challenges with it. So let's just remind ourselves of what these sounds entail. The sound L is created with your tongue on the roof of your mouth. L. L. The sound R is created with your teeth on the inside of your bottom lip. R. So, to take some examples, lamb is different to ram. Long is different to wrong. And of course, a word like really, lively, might be difficult to say. It would be good to practice these sounds and make sure that each time we see the L, we have our tongue on the roof of our mouth, and each time we see the R, we have our teeth on the inside of our bottom lip. And to keep practicing that until we're confident in recreating both of those sounds correctly. Now, one of the most unique sounds, which we discussed in our consonant section, is the TH sound, the, or th. Now, depending on where you are from, this sound might be produced differently. If you're from France, typically the will sound like z and th will sound like s. So we're just changing to a z and an s sound, z and s. So a French person who's learning English might pronounce this thing as this sing. Now obviously that is then a giveaway that they speak a different language, which isn't a problem. But of course, sing is a different word. A famous advert showed somebody saying, I am sinking, as in I'm going under the water, and somebody thought they were saying, I am thinking. This shows why it is important to work on the correct pronunciation of the and th. If you need to, repeat the previous lesson that we did in the consonant section and make sure your tongue is between your teeth. The and th. In other parts, they will change these two sounds to become V and F, V and F. And so they will say this thing. Again, this is not very good accent. It's not a very good accent. And the problem with this, of course, is that you might be trying to use the word three, but instead you say free, which of course means that something is at no charge. So this is another one to be careful of. People will typically struggle when they have another letter after this consonant sound. So as in the last example, if you have the letter R after th, three, you might feel like there's lots to go on with your mouth. So just make the transitions between th and r. Thra. Thra. So your top teeth need to make the nice transition between going from just above your tongue down to your bottom lip. And then you'll be able to correctly reproduce this sound and not confuse anybody by saying a different word to what you actually mean. Another common mistake which English people will hear from those who are learning English is the V and W letters, or the V and W sounds. Now the V, as we've already mentioned, is with your top teeth on your bottom lip. V. And you feel the vibration. The W sound, your lips are close but they're not actually touching. W. It's more like a soft vowel sound. Now vowel is actually a very good word. If you find yourself saying wow or verbs instead of verbs, then you need to concentrate on making sure that when you see the letter V, you pronounce the V clearly with your top teeth on your bottom lip. Some people will say wery instead of very. Again, we need to be careful of this. However, some people will do the other way around and they will say when I want instead of when I want. So whichever your problem is, make sure you clearly understand the difference between the sounds and then practice them until you can consistently speak the right sounds for these two different sounds. Another problem which affects ones more from the Indian subcontinent is the tendency to say the letters D and T with the tongue too far back in the mouth. This means that often instead of D and T, the sound will come out as D and D. This is caused by the tongue going further back and it being a D rather than a D. So as a reminder, when we're using the letter or making the sound D, our teeth should be close together and our tongue very close behind our teeth. D. You will only be able to make the D sound if your tongue is far too far back in your mouth, and you should bring your tongue forward, let it relax behind your teeth being close together. The same applies for the sound T. When we're talking about T, we don't want to be saying D. We want to be saying T. This again will help to make our British accent more authentic and make sure that we can be easily understood with what we're trying to say. Another area which affects typically some more European speakers is the difference between J and Y, or the sounds J and Y. Typically, some Spanish speakers will find this difficult. So J, as we discussed in our consonant lesson, is where we have our tongue and the roof of our mouth close together and our teeth. J. The sound Y is similar, but our tongue doesn't touch the roof of our mouth. Y. There's still space between for the air to come out. J, They're together and they're pulling apart. So, what might be some words that we could end up getting confused? We might be trying to say yellow, and we're saying jello. Well, jello is an American word for jelly, which of course is a food, so this is two different words. So y and j need to be separated and practiced where we need to make sure that we can produce these independently and correctly. Now, the single biggest reason how most people can be identified as a foreigner, as somebody who didn't grow up in Britain, is the way they use the letter R. Now, we've spoken about R quite an amount already, and the reason for this is that it's so important to get the letter R correctly if you want to sound like a British accent, like you have a British accent. So, we've spoken already about the fact that the letter R can be produced differently in different countries. So it might take some practice to get this R sound. However, North American English speakers will pronounce this R much more than the British English. Let me give you an example. If I'm saying the word Carter, or the name Carter, I would say car, which as we discussed is the R affected A long vowel, R, and then Carter. I might even say it like an Carter. But if I'm North American, I'll say Carter or Carter. You'll notice this we call this a twang, and this is much more made on the North American continent than it is in British English. This is something to be very aware of, because many people will perhaps learn at school, or they will learn from a course which will teach them that they should sound this sound. We might be saying the word course. Now, if you say course, then I can hear the sound in there. But as we've already discussed, when the letter R comes after a vowel, the R disappears. It just makes it into a different vowel. So in the word course, we have the sound or. Not or, just or. Course, horse, paw. I don't finish this with poor, just paw. So translating this perhaps to words that end in ER, as we discussed in our previous section, the sound is used very often in English. Creator, maker, labour, nicer, faster. There are so many different examples when we have ER, OR, IR, whatever it is at the end of the word, we don't create this R sound. We just make the sound. And the more that you know this and are aware of this, and you listen to British people speaking, the more you will hear this. This is such an important point, because if you make the R sound, people will always be able to identify the fact that you have an accent from somewhere else. Which again is no problem. Accents are lovely. But to sound like an authentic British English speaker, try not to make the R sound. Just let it shape the vowel that you're speaking. If it's or, ah, or or and then you will sound much more British, and people will notice very clearly that you have adopted a good British accent. So now it's time to practice some of these sounds which we've been learning. the consonant sounds, voiced, non-voiced, and of course the few nasal sounds, and the vowel sounds, the short sounds, the long sounds, and the combined sounds which change their shape. Now these sentences which we are going to discuss will contain many different sounds. So we will start by me saying the sentence. I will then explain some of the different sounds that we want to keep an eye out for. I will then say, it's your turn. And then once you have tried to say it, I will say it once more, and we can compare to make sure that the pronunciation is as good as it can be. And of course, you can go over these as many times as necessary in order to make sure that your British pronunciation is sounding good and clear. So let's get started on our first expression. So here is our first exercise. Afternoon tea and crumpets. So the different sounds that we have in here, we have R for afternoon, we have after, we have ooh. Each of these are typically British sounds. And then of course in the word tea, we have ta, that clipped British t, and we have e. And crumpets is a typical British food. So now I will say it once more. Afternoon tea and crumpets. Now it's your turn. And now let's try it together. Afternoon tea and crumpets. Good work. Let's go on to the next exercise. In this exercise, we'll be practicing particularly the sound I. So, it's bath night tonight. Notice again we have the R in bath. We have night tonight. So, here's the exercise again. It's bath night tonight. Your turn. And together, it's bath night tonight. Good stuff. Here's the third exercise. What a lovely bunch of flowers. So we start with our missing H sound by saying what. And sadly, this is the letter A. It sounds like the short vowel sound O, but we have the letter A there. What a lovely. Now, again, we have a different vowel sound to what it looks like. The word love is really with the short vowel sound A, love, but it has the letters O and E, such as the English language. Now, we don't say lovely, we say lovely. So the Y at the end is pronounced like the E sound, lovely. Bunch, we have the N nasal sound, followed by the Ch, bunch. The of course, has the V sound, even though it's the letter F, of. And then we have flowers. Ow, 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 So there's plenty to practice in this expression. I'll say it once more. What a lovely bunch of flowers. Your turn. And together. What a lovely bunch of flowers. Now I hope that we sounded identical then, and I hope you managed to make all these sounds correctly. So here's the next exercise. I'm feeling bright and breezy. So I is one of our combined vowels, which goes I. Feeling, E, I. And of course, at the end of ing, we have that nasal ng sound, which was the last of our consonant sounds that we discussed earlier. Bright is I, and breezy is EZ, the same sound twice in that same word. So I'll say it once more. I'm feeling bright and breezy. Your turn. And now together. I'm feeling bright and breezy. Excellent. So the next exercise. I like walking and talking. Now, you'll notice that in both of these words, walking and talking, we have the L, which isn't produced. We don't hear the L, walk. It's walk and talk. This is the OR sound, which we discussed earlier. Or, like the word or, walk. Just to point out at this stage, if you have W-O-R-K, that is pronounced work. Because English is so annoying, work has the sound that we would normally expect to be with an IR or ER or UR. But instead, in this instance, because it is irregular, work is spelt with OR. But in this case, we're talking about the sound OR, walking and talking. So, I'll say it once more. I like walking and talking. Your turn. And now together. I like walking and talking. Excellent. So in this exercise, we are going to use 3 words which all miss out a letter, and we have an apostrophe in instead. So you're probably used to the expression haven't, which is have, not, and we take out the O of not and we put it all together, but we put in a little apostrophe to show where the letter O used to be. This is very common in English with different words. So, here is our expression. I haven't, I wouldn't, and I shan't. So, in each of these, you'll notice we have the nt at the end. Haven't. Now, the first sound is a, but the second sound is the the most common vowel sound in the English language. Haven't. Wouldn't is which of course is one of our short vowel sounds. And then the nt again is our most common vowel sound. And shan't is our long R sound. And make sure that we get that nice sh sound at the beginning. So I'll say it again. I haven't, I wouldn't, and I shan't. Your turn. And now together. I haven't, I wouldn't, and I shan't. Keep up the good work. So another one which uses some of these missing letters replaced by apostrophes. I don't because I can't. So don't is O, our long combined O sound, and can't again R, or AR, aren't sound. Now, this is a word, or both of these words can be confusing if they're not pronounced correctly. For example, many people will say don't instead of don't. They use the short O sound, don't. But this is incorrect. It needs to be oh, don't, I don't. And can't, if this is pronounced incorrectly, it sounds very much like can. If you say can, can't, as some will when they're speaking English, if you can't hear somebody clearly, you might not be able to tell the difference between which one they're saying. Whereas if we're speaking English with a good British accent, we'll say can, can, and can't, So and 2 different vowel sounds, one short, one long. So I'll say it again. I don't because I can't. Your turn. And now together. I don't because I can't. Very good. We're getting through a good number of these exercises. So let's keep going. So here's our next exercise. London is beautiful in the springtime. London. What sound is in London? It's not London, as it looks like it should be. It's lun, so and then dun, our most common vowel sound. London. So beautiful. Do you remember we discussed that sound where if we have a U followed by an E, we have the beau. Instead of beautiful, we're saying beautiful. Again, this is very good English sound to make, very authentic. So London is beautiful, but spring. Now here we've got s, p, r. We've got 3 consonant sounds all together to make spring. And then at the end, ing, that nasal sound again. So I'll say it and see if you can correctly produce all of these sounds. London is beautiful in the springtime. Your turn. And now together. London is beautiful in the springtime. So our next exercise. I quickly warm to the charming dog. Quick, qu. Now this sound, as we discussed before, is like k followed by w, qu. So quickly is how we would say that word. Now warm and charm, you'll notice both have the same ARM in them. But one is pronounced warm, so it's the OR sound, the OR sound. And the next is R, the AR sound, R. So let's try saying this. I quickly warm to the charming dog. Watch out for when you're saying this, that we still keep the to, the t of to, and the in there. The, not shortening these or missing these out, but we're getting all these sounds in there together. I quickly warm to the charming dog. Your turn. And together. I quickly warm to the charming dog. Okay, so for this next exercise, we're going to pronounce the sounds the and th. Do you know why this thing is so important? This is an expression which you could say every day in English. They're all very common words, and so it's important that we pronounce these correctly. Let's start with the last word, important. Now, we need to be very careful with this word, because some people will put the stress on the im, which is wrong. We need to put the stress on the or. Important. Now the last vowel sound, what is it? It's a. Important. It's the most common vowel sound again. You'll notice this all the time. Now that you know about this sound, you will notice it all the time in English speech. So, do, you is the oo sound, the double O sound. O, no, that's our O that's shaped by the E. O. Y is our I sound, I shaped by the E. This thing, both I. So let's try to say the whole sentence together, making sure we get the correct vowel sounds and the and th correctly. Do you know why this thing is so important? Your turn. And together. Do you know why this thing is so important? Very good. Okay, our next exercise is going to be much harder, and we're practicing our TH sound again. This is an expression which people will often say. You can't say fairer than that then. Okay, so we've got fairer, not fairer, but fairer. Again, don't forget at the end, it's just the sound. Than, that, then. In this case, all three of the THs are voiced. Than, that, then. But that doesn't make it easier. Let's try saying the whole sentence. You can't say fairer than that then. Your turn. And together. You can't say fairer than that then. If you've managed to produce this expression sounding similar to how it should sound in the correct British accent, then you're doing very well. Keep up the good work. Now we're going to have an exercise that helps us to focus on the R sound. R. My bicycle doesn't ride on the right side of the road. So, we've also got the I here. Do you remember the I? The I that's shaped by the E? My bicycle doesn't ride on the right side of the road. So with these R sounds, we've got right, ride, and road. Let's see how we get on. My bicycle doesn't ride on the right side of the road. Your turn. Let's try it together. My bicycle doesn't ride on the right side of the road. So now we've got another one to help us with the R sound and the L sound. These verbs are really, really hard to grasp. So in here we've got the at the beginning. We've got the V and B to make sure we pronounce these separately. And we've got really, really. This is a word that's very hard for some people to say if they've grown up speaking another language. And of course, our last word, grasp, we have gr and sp. So two sets of joined sounds, which we want to try to produce. So here we go. These verbs are really, really hard to grasp. Your turn. Now let's do it together. These verbs are really, really hard to grasp. Okay, let's do a slightly more simple one. Cats and dogs come out to play. Here we've got some short vowel sounds and some longer vowel sounds. A, cats, o, dogs, a, come. Then we've got ow, out, and a, play. So, cats and dogs come out to play. Your turn. And now let's do it together. cats and dogs come out to play. Now in this exercise, you'll notice that some of the vowels are not what the correct sounds would appear to be. The expression is this: these wasps surely are a nuisance. So, wasps. Now this word is quite hard because you have the O when it looks like it should be A, but it is O is the correct pronunciation. And then you've got sps. So S-P-S, wasps. We also get this with the word crisps, which many people find it hard to say. Then we've got surely. Now the S-U here, you'll notice there's no H, but we're making the sh sound with the word sure. So surely. And then the last word is nuisance. This is the new. Rather than just new, it's new. We've got the y sound in there as well. And then the unts is just our common vowel that we seem to get in nearly every expression. So let's try it. These wasps surely are a nuisance. Your turn. Now let's do it together. These wasps surely are a nuisance. Now, if you manage to say the word are there as just are, then well done. If you said are, then maybe try it again. So our next exercise. Cushions and pillows are entirely different. Now in this one we have the expression sh in cushion. It's followed of course by the that we're used to by now. And pillows, I-O, short I, long O. We then have entirely, so aya, tire, aya, entirely. Now make sure you don't pronounce the r in entire. It's not entirely, it's entirely. And then different, different. So let's try it. Cushions and pillows are entirely different. Your turn. And now together. Cushions and pillows are entirely different. Our next exercise. Poodles and puppies are perfect pets. So you can hear we're practicing the p sound. Poodles, poodle, Puppies, e. Perfect, perfect. Poodles and puppies are perfect pets. Your turn. And now together. Poodles and puppies are perfect pets. So now our last exercise for this section. I never tire of a nice log fire. We have this sound again, aya, which is aya. We have this twice, tire and fire. But we also have never, which is being our most common sound. So let's try this one. I never tire of a nice log fire. Your turn. And now let's do it together. I never tire of a nice log fire. Excellent work. So, congratulations! You've reached the end of this course, and hopefully by now you have a good understanding of all the different sounds that make up British English. Now, it doesn't stop here. Learning continues, and all the time you'll be finding different ways, different spellings of the ways that we pronounce all of these different sounds and how we know when to produce what sound. Unfortunately, because English is very irregular, you'll find lots of different examples of this. But of course, you have lots of resources to help you to listen and to practice and to get these principles, these sounds firmly lodged into your mind so that when you can speak clearly, you can be better understood, and hopefully not struggle to communicate with others. I really hope this course has been helpful to you, and if it has, I'd be very happy if you could leave some feedback so that others too can have the benefit of learning. And on an ongoing basis, I will be updating this course with lectures or extra exercises which will help. So if you have any particular areas that you would like assistance with, then please feel free to put a message on the forum, and then I will aim to include these expressions that you would like help with in my update videos, perhaps every month or two. So I'm very pleased that you decided to take this course. I really hope it's been helpful, and I wish you all the best with your speaking good British English.